A childhood adventure turned nightmare. The yellow eyes still haunt me. I still remember the day we saw it. The thing with the yellow eyes. It was the summer of my childhood. One of those scorching days during the school holidays, when the heat clung to our skin like a second layer. We were a rowdy bunch of cousins, buzzing with restless energy, driving the adults up the wall. The older boys, our heroes at 16, 17, and 18, offered to take us blackberry picking, a surefire way to keep us occupied. Mama and Auntie agreed without hesitation. They trusted the boys. We did too. Gran's house sat on the edge of the heath, with a fence that had a convenient gap just big enough for a child to slip through. One by one, we passed through, the older boys carefully lifting my wheelchair over before helping me through. And then we were off, marching towards the fields, the promise of sweet berries guiding us forward. The older boys did what they always did, told ghost stories. They were good at it, masters of suspense, knowing exactly when to pause for dramatic effect. We shrieked and laughed, hanging on to their every word. But then the Waterhouse came into view, and the laughter died. No one spoke near the Waterhouse. It stood hunched over the landscape like a forgotten relic, its crumbling brickwork covered in vines, its windows shattered by decades of childhood mischief. It had once housed the estate's water system, but now it was nothing more than an empty shell, abandoned and rotting. Still, despite its mundane origins, the place felt wrong, as if it were watching us. We hurried past, keeping our eyes on the blackberry field ahead, but the stories we'd grown up with whispered in the back of our minds. Long ago, in the early 1960s, a gang of bank robbers had terrorized the area. They weren't just criminals, they were monsters, ruthless and bloodthirsty. Their final job went horribly wrong. A 19-year-old bank clerk was shot dead. 5 more were left clinging to life. One of the robbers died in the chaos. Another was gravely wounded. The remaining gang members fled, seeking refuge in the Waterhouse, which at the time was still intact, a perfect hideout for desperate men. But something happened inside those walls. No one knows how or why, but months later their bodies were found there, decayed and twisted, their faces frozen in expressions of unspeakable horror. No cause of death was ever determined. No signs of struggle. Just death. Then the hauntings began. Figures were seen moving in the shadows. A smell of rot clung to the air like a warning. At night, eerie wails echoed across the heath. In the late 70s, the death started. Homeless people, found lifeless near the Waterhouse, their faces locked in fear. There was never any proof, never any explanation. But everyone knew. The Waterhouse was cursed, and it was hungry. We did not linger near it. When we reached the field, the tension eased. We lost ourselves in the sweetness of the blackberries, the laughter of our friends, the cool splash of the river. For a while, the Waterhouse was just a bad memory. But then, the sun began to sink, and the shadows stretched long. It was time to go. The walk back was different. The air felt thick, charged with something unseen. By the time we reached the fence near the Waterhouse, the world had gone eerily still. A, the youngest of the older boys, had just lifted me from my wheelchair when he froze. His breath hitched. "Something moved back there," he whispered. We shot him a look. "Don't start, A. Not now." But A wasn't joking. His face was pale, his usual mischief gone. "I'm going to check it out." Before anyone could stop him, he stepped towards the Waterhouse. "A, don't." We started, but it was too late. I took 3 steps forward. Then he screamed. It wasn't just a scream. It was a raw, primal sound of horror. He stumbled back, his eyes wide, his hands shaking. "Run!" H shouted. And we did. We grabbed my wheelchair, folding it as he sprinted. I yanked the younger kids forward. H threw me onto his shoulders and ran, faster than I'd ever seen him move. The air behind us felt heavy, charged wrong. "Don't look back." I gasped. "Don't look back." But I did, and I saw it. A pair of yellow eyes, glowing in the darkness of the Waterhouse. A hairy face, twisted and inhuman, watching us. I blinked and it was gone. But the fear remained. We didn't stop running until we reached the estate, until the glow of streetlights banished the horrors of the heath. We collapsed, gasping for air, our limbs trembling. B, still panting, turned to A. What did you see? A swallowed hard, yellow eyes, a hairy face, watching us. The younger kids whimpered, their tiny hands clutching at our shirts. H knelt down, his voice calm and steady. It was just a drunk, he said, looking for golf balls. That's all. We nodded. We wanted to believe him. We needed to believe him. When we got home, Mama and Auntie noticed our pale faces. They asked what had happened. H lied, repeating the story of the drunk, and they believed him. But we never told them the truth. We never told them about the thing in the water house, and we never went near it again. I bought a house for dirt cheap. Now I know why no one ever stays. When Lisa and I found the house, it felt like fate. A beautiful Victorian home, sold for almost nothing, standing alone on the outskirts of town. The real estate agent wouldn't meet us in person, just mailed the keys and the paperwork. A bad omen maybe, but we ignored it. People just don't appreciate history anymore, Lisa had said, running her hands over the wooden banister, admiring the delicate carvings. At the time, I agreed. Now I know better. The house was fully furnished. Plates sat untouched on the dining table, as if dinner had been abruptly abandoned. A coffee cup rested on the kitchen counter. A dark stain dried at the bottom. Upstairs, closets were still filled with clothes. Dressers held wedding rings and old watches. It was as if the previous owners had stepped out for a walk and never returned. Guess they left in a hurry, Lisa joked, trying to shake the unease. But the air inside felt thick, like we weren't alone. The first night, I heard footsteps, not the usual creaks and groans of an old house adjusting. These were heavy, deliberate steps pacing outside our bedroom door. I held my breath, listening. Then, the doorknob rattled. I shot up, my heart slamming against my ribs. But when I opened the door, the hallway was empty. The air smelled stale, damp, like something had been standing there for a very long time. Lisa mumbled in her sleep. I crawled back into bed, telling myself it was just my imagination. It wasn't. The next day, I explored the basement. I found a door that shouldn't have been there. It was old, older than the rest of the house, with deep gouges along the wood, as if something had clawed at it, desperate to get out. Thick rusted chains wrapped around it, holding it shut. I hesitated. Then a thump sounded from the other side. I staggered back, my breath catching. The sound came again, a slow, steady knocking. Lisa appeared at the top of the basement stairs. Jason, what's wrong? I stared at the door. The air had changed, turning ice cold. This door, it's not in the house plans. Another thump, louder this time. Lisa grabbed my arm. We are not opening that. I wish we had left right then. That night, the whispering started. Soft at first, just on the edge of hearing. Then my name, clear as day. I followed the sound downstairs, my mind foggy with sleep. The basement door stood wide open. A gust of freezing air rushed past me. Beyond the doorway was something impossible, a long, dimly lit hallway lined with doors, stretching deep underground. Lisa, I whispered, come look at this. We stepped inside. The first door creaked open on its own. Inside was our house. But something was wrong. The furniture was arranged differently. The photos on the walls were the same, but our faces were scratched out. A dark, wet stain spread across the ceiling, pulsing as if the house itself were alive. Lisa picked up an old newspaper lying on the coffee table. The date was from 10 years ago. The headline read, "New homeowners missing without a trace." A chill ran down my spine. We turned to leave, but the door was gone. Panic set in. We ran to the next door, throwing it open. Inside was a nursery, but we didn't have kids. A crib sat in the center, rocking gently. Inside, a moldy old baby doll stared up at us, its plastic eyes lifeless. Then it blinked. A giggle filled the room, but it didn't come from the doll. Lisa yanked me backward, slamming the door shut. We need to get out. Now. But the hallway had changed. The walls shifted, growing narrower, the shadows stretching impossibly long. Then we saw the last door. It was already open. Inside was our bedroom. and we were inside it. Lisa and I stood frozen, staring at the figures lying in our bed. They were us, but wrong. Their skin was too pale, their breathing too slow. Then, suddenly, they sat up, simultaneously. Their heads turned toward us, eyes wide and empty. Their mouths stretched open and kept opening. A slow, choked screech poured out of them, growing louder and louder. Lisa screamed. We ran. We sprinted down the hall, but it stretched, pulling us backward. The lights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows that moved on their own. Then we heard it, footsteps chasing us. Lisa tripped. I yanked her up, barely dodging something lunging at us from the darkness. The basement door was ahead, so close. Lisa made it through first. I dove after her, slamming it shut. The house groaned like a living thing, shuddering in rage. Silence. We collapsed, gasping for air. The house was normal again. The hallway was gone. The basement was just a basement. Lisa grabbed my arm, shaking. Are we back? I checked my phone. The date and time were correct. I exhaled. Yeah, I think so. Then, SFX, a slow, rhythmic knock from the other side of the basement door. We froze. Then, in my own voice from behind the door, "Let's out." We left that night. Didn't even take our things. Just ran. The house is for sale again. The listing says fully furnished. Price to sell fast. I check the listing every now and then. I always wonder, who will be next? The night someone tried to get into our house, and we never found out who. It was the late 80s or early 90s, deep in the heart of West Texas. I was just a kid, maybe 6 or 7, staying home with my older sister, who was around 15. Our small town was the kind where everyone knew each other, and nothing truly bad ever happened, or so we thought. That winter night was colder than usual, and the desert darkness wrapped around our home like a suffocating blanket. We sat in the living room, the only light coming from the flickering glow of our bulky TV, tuned into one of those true crime specials, 48 Hours, hard copy. One of those deep dives into gruesome crimes. This particular episode was about a quiet, unassuming neighbor who snapped, slaughtering an entire family before kidnapping their young daughter. The words "manhunt underway" echoed through the speakers, painting a chilling picture in our minds. Our living room had an eerie design. One wall was made entirely of floor-to-ceiling windows, with sliding glass door leading to the backyard. Without the porch light on, all we could see was endless blackness, our reflections barely visible against the void. The front door, solid and unyielding, had a glass storm door in front of it, offering the only real barrier between us and whatever was outside. We were about 45 minutes into the show when it happened. Bam, bam, bam. The front door shuddered under the weight of something, or someone, hitting it. Hard. We screamed. My sister gripped my arm so tightly it hurt. Silence followed. The only sound was the TV humming behind us. Our minds raced. Maybe the wind? Maybe something on the porch had fallen over? West Texas winds were no joke, after all. We barely had time to breathe before we heard it. The metallic click of the storm door closing. Someone had been there. Someone had opened that door to reach the front door. We sat frozen, our eyes locked on each other, our bodies rigid with terror. The next few seconds stretched into eternity. My sister finally moved, crawling toward the TV to turn it off. The heavy dial clicked off with a loud thunk, plunging us into near darkness, save for the weak glow from the kitchen down the hall. And then I heard it, not from the front door, from behind us. The sliding glass door handle twisted. I turned slowly, my breath caught in my throat. The darkness outside was absolute, but the handle moved, rattling, testing the lock. We hadn't deadbolted. My sister hadn't seen yet, until the moment it happened. Bam, bam, bam. The entire glass wall shuddered as someone yanked the door violently, trying to break in. The glass flexed, our reflections warping with each brutal pull. My sister lost it. She screamed like she was being murdered, and that sound must have startled whoever was out there, because the pounding stopped instantly. She grabbed my arm and yanked me down the hallway, nearly dragging me to her bedroom. With shaking hands, she slammed the door, shoved her mattress against it, and grabbed the heavy cordless phone. Panic consumed her. She couldn't remember the sheriff's number. She hit redial. It rang. Hello. Not the police. One of her friends. Somebody is trying to get into the house. Get here now. That moment seared into my memory. Her voice cracked, raw with terror. I curled into myself, trembling, unable to think, unable to move. The house was silent again, but we knew. Someone had been out there, waiting, watching. Minutes stretched until headlights flooded the driveway. My sister's friend and her parents had arrived. We stayed huddled in that room until they checked every inch of the property. Nothing. No footprints, no broken glass, no signs of forced entry. Just a few scuff marks on the bottom of the back door that we couldn't remember being there before. We never found out who it was, or what they wanted. But after that night, we never forgot to lock a door again. You made it to the end, but the real horror is missing out on the next story. Face screaming in fear, so like, subscribe, and turn on notifications if you're brave and oog.